Commander Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the landing platform and watched the alien shuttle descend through the green clouds of Sarath 4. And he knew that the next 3 weeks would test every ounce of patience he possessed. Jungle worlds stretched out in every direction. A hostile expanse of towering trees with bark like iron and vines that moved when you were not looking. And somewhere in that deadly wilderness lay the ruins they had come to study, ruins that both humans and Valkyrie claimed as their own. Marcus had read the briefing files a dozen times, and he understood the stakes perfectly well. This diplomatic mission could open trade routes worth billions of credits, or it could collapse into war if someone made the wrong move. And High Command had chosen him because he never made wrong moves. The shuttle landed with a soft hiss of hydraulics, and the ramp lowered to reveal the Valkyrie delegation in all their cold splendor. They were beautiful in the way the predators are beautiful, with scales that shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue, and eyes like polished amber that held no warmth whatsoever. And they moved with a fluid grace that made humans look clumsy by comparison. At their head walked Ambassador Saritha, daughter of the High Matriarch herself, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten as she approached. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her scales a rare silver white that marked her royal bloodline, and she wore robes of woven metal that chimed softly with each step. And when her amber eyes found Marcus, they held nothing but contempt. "You are the human liaison," she said. And it was not a question. "Commander Marcus Cole." "Ambassador," he replied with a respectful nod. "I am honored to escort your delegation through Sarath 4. She made a sound in her throat that might have been amusement or might have been disgust. And Marcus suspected it was the latter. The matriarch insisted on human involvement in this expedition, Saretha said. "Though I fail to understand why we require the assistance of warm-blooded creatures who cannot even regulate their own body temperature." Marcus kept his expression neutral because he had dealt with alien prejudice before, and he knew that losing his temper would only prove her right. "We have extensive experience with jungle environments, Ambassador, and Sarath 4 has claimed the lives of many who underestimated it." "Valkyrie do not underestimate anything," she replied, and she walked past him without another glance. The other members of her delegation followed. 6 guards in ceremonial armor and 3 scholars carrying equipment Marcus did not recognize. And none of them acknowledged him as they passed. Captain Torres appeared at Marcus's side and let out a low whistle. "Friendly bunch," she muttered. "They consider us primitive," Marcus said quietly. "Something between animals and actual sentient beings." And the ambassador made it very clear in the briefing that physical contact with Valkyrie nobility is forbidden under penalty of death. Torres raised an eyebrow at that. "Death seems a bit extreme for bumping into someone. Their culture is built on hierarchy and sacred boundaries, and touching a noble without permission is considered the ultimate violation, worse than murder in their eyes." "Well then," Torres said with a grim smile, "let's make sure nobody touches anybody." The expedition set out the next morning, 3 human guides leading the way through the dense jungle, while the Valkyrie followed in careful formation. Marcus walked near the rear, keeping watch on the delegation while staying far enough away to avoid causing offense. And he used the time to observe their behaviors and interactions. The Valkyrie moved differently in the jungle than they had on the landing platform. Their confidence seemed diminished by the pressing heat and humidity. And more than once, Marcus saw them stumble on roots that a human would have stepped over easily. Their cold-blooded nature made them sluggish in the warm climate. And Marcus realized with some surprise that the ambassador herself was struggling more than her guards. She would never admit it, of course, because admitting weakness was not something Valkyrie nobles did. But Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders and the slight tremor in her hands on the 3rd day. They reached the ancient ruins. The structures rose from the jungle floor like the bones of some vast creature, covered in vines and moss, but still magnificent after thousands of years. And both humans and Valkyrie stood in silence for a moment, awed by the sight. "The architecture matches neither human nor Valkyrie design," one of the scholars said. And there was wonder in his voice despite his species' reputation for emotional control. "A third civilization," Siritha murmured, "older than both our peoples." For just a moment, Marcus saw something other than contempt in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or even excitement, and then she noticed him watching, and her expression hardened once more. "The human guards will establish a perimeter," she commanded, "while our scholars begin their documentation. You will ensure we are not disturbed." "Of course, Ambassador," Marcus said, and he turned to organize his team. The work continued for several hours, with the Valkyrie scholars moving through the ruins and recording everything they found while Marcus and his people patrolled the edges of the site. The jungle was quieter here than it had been on the trail, and Marcus did not know if that was a good sign or a bad one. He was checking the eastern perimeter when he noticed Siritha Faye walking alone toward a partially collapsed structure at the far end of the ruins. And his instincts immediately screamed that something was wrong. No guards accompanied her, which was unusual, and she seemed almost drawn to the building, as if something inside was calling to him. Marcus followed at a distance because approaching too closely would be inappropriate. But he could not ignore the feeling that danger was near. Siritha entered the structure and disappeared from view, and Marcus quickened his pace. He reached the entrance just as he heard her gasp, and he rushed inside to find her standing before a wall covered in strange carvings, her attention so focused on the ancient symbols that she did not see the creature coiled in the shadows beside her. Sarati Fang Viper struck before Marcus could shout a warning, its fangs sinking deep into her inner thigh before it slithered away into the darkness. And Siritha crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain and shock. Marcus was at her side in an instant, his training taking over as his mind raced through everything. He knew about the deadly serpent. The venom would reach her hearts in minutes, and the Valkyrie had no immunity to it whatsoever, and if he did not act immediately, the daughter of the High Matriarch would die in this forgotten ruin on a hostile world. He looked at her face, saw the fear in her amber eyes, and made his decision. Everything else could wait. The venom was already spreading through her bloodstream, and Marcus could see the dark lines creeping up from the wound like black lightning beneath her silver scalus. Asayth tried to speak, but her voice came out as a strangled whisper, and her body began to shake as the neurotoxin attacked her nervous system. "Ambassador, listen to me," Marcus said as he knelt beside her. "The venom will kill you in minutes unless I can draw it out. Do you understand what I am saying?" Her amber eyes were wide with pain and fear, and she managed a small nod even as her breathing became labored. Marcus knew what he had to do, and he knew exactly what it would cost him. Touching a Valkyrie noble was punishable by death, and what he was about to do went far beyond a simple touch. But none of that mattered because a woman was dying in front of him, and Marcus Cole had never been able to watch someone die when he had the power to save them. He pulled his knife from his belt and cut away the metal fabric of her diplomatic robes, exposing the wound on her inner thigh where the fangs had punctured her scales, and the flesh around the bite was already swelling and turning a sickly gray color. "I am sorry," he said, though he was not sure if he was apologizing for what he was about to do or for the pain she was feeling. "This is going to be unpleasant." He pressed his mouth to the wound and began to suck, drawing the poisoned blood out and spitting it onto the stone floor. And the taste was like fire and copper and something chemical that burned his tongue, and Lipsaritha made a sound that was half scream and half sob, and her clawed hands scraped against the ancient stones as her body fought the invasion of both venom and human. Marcus did not stop because stopping meant her death. So he continued drawing out the poison, even as his own mouth began to go numb and his vision started to blur at the edges. Venom was affecting him too, seeping through the soft tissue of his lips and gums. But human physiology was more resistant than Valkyrie, and he could survive a small amount where she could not survive any. He worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, spitting out mouthful after mouthful of poisoned blood until the dark lines on her thigh began to fade, and her breathing started to steady when he finally pulled back. His lips were swollen and bleeding, and the world seemed to spin around him in slow, lazy circles. "Stay with me, Ambassador," he managed to say, though his words came out slurred and strange. "Help is coming." He was not actually sure if help was coming, but it seemed like the right thing to say. The sound of running footsteps reached his ears. And then the entrance to the structure was filled with Valkyrie guards, their weapons drawn and their amber eyes blazing with fury. They saw their ambassador lying on the ground with her robes torn and a human kneeling over her, his face covered in her blood, and they reached the only conclusion their culture allowed them to reach. "Seize him," the lead guard shouted, and two of them grabbed Marcus by the arms and threw him against the wall with enough force to crack the stone. Behind him, he did not resist because resisting would only make things worse. And besides, he barely had the strength to stand. "You dare touch the daughter of the matriarch," the guard snarled, pressing his blade against Marcus's throat. "You will die slowly for this violation." "Human, wait," came a weak voice from the floor, and everyone turned to look at Sirith. Ash was struggling to sit up, her silver scales pale and her body still trembling. But she was alive and her eyes were clear. "He saved my life," she said, and the words seemed to cost her a great deal of effort. "A serpent, the venom," he drew it out. The guards looked at each other in confusion, because this was not what they had expected to hear, and they did not know how to process information that contradicted their initial assumptions. "Ambassador," the lead guard said carefully, "this human had his mouth on your flesh. Sacred law demands his execution, regardless of intent." "I know what sacred law demands," Siritha replied, and there was a hint of her old sharpness returning to her voice. "Take him into custody, but do not harm him. Not until the council decides what is to be done." Marcus met her eyes across the dim space of the ruined building, and he saw something there that had not been present before. Not gratitude exactly, because Valkyrie did not express gratitude, but perhaps a question: why had he done it, knowing what it would cost him? "Take me wherever you need to take me," Marcus said to the guards. "But get her to medical care first. The venom may still be in her system." The guard pressed the blade harder against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "You do not give orders here, human." "He is right," Siritha said. "I require treatment. Carry out his request." She had phrased it as his request rather than her own command, which meant something in Valkyrie culture that Marcus did not fully understand. But the guards obeyed without further argument. They dragged Marcus out of the ruins and threw him into a makeshift cell constructed from energy barriers. And then they rushed their ambassador to the medical shuttle that had landed in the clearing. Marcus sat alone in his glowing prison, his lips still burning from the venom and his heart still racing from what he had done. And he thought about how strange it was that saving a life could be considered a crime. The hours passed slowly, and he heard fragments of conversation from the Valkyrie outsidewards, like violation and execution, and diplomatic incident, and he understood that his fate was being decided by people who saw him as little more than an animal captain. Torres appeared at the edge of the energy barrier, her face tight with worry. "What the hell happened in there, Commander?" "I saved her life," Marcus said simply, "and apparently that is punishable by death." Torres shook her head in disbelief. "Earth Command is going crazy. They're talking about sending warships, threatening to end the treaty, everything short of declaring war." "Tell them to stand down," Marcus said. Making this into a bigger incident will not help anyone. You might die. Marcus, I know, he replied, and he found that he was surprisingly calm about the possibility. But she would have died for certain if I had done nothing. At least this way, one of us might survive. Torres stared at him for a long moment. And then she shook her head again. You humans, she muttered, though of course she was human herself. Always thinking with your hearts instead of your heads. Marcus almost smiled at that. Is the ambassador going to survive? They say she will recover fully, Torres replied. Thanks to you. Then it was worth it, Marcus said. And he leaned his head back against the wall of his cell and closed his eyes. Whatever happened next, he had made the right choice, and that was enough. Saritha awoke in the medical bay of her ship with machines humming softly around her and the taste of healing herbs on her tongue. And for a moment she did not remember how she had gotten there. Then, the memories returned in a flood of images and sensations, the serpent striking, the fire spreading through her veins, the human kneeling over her with his mouth pressed to her flesh, and she sat up so quickly that the monitors beside her bed began to scream in alarm. Ambassador, please remain calm, said the medical officer as he rushed to her side. Your body is still recovering from the neurotoxin. The human, Saritha demanded. Where is the human who saved me? The medical officer's expression shifted to something complicated, a mixture of discomfort and uncertainty that told her everything she needed to know. He is being held in a containment cell. Ambassador, the council has been informed of the incident, and they are demanding his extradition for trial and execution. Saritha lay back against her pillows and tried to process what she was feeling, which was difficult because she had never felt anything quite like it before. A primitive, emotional, inferior creature had willingly poisoned himself to save her life, knowing full well that the act itself might result in his death. Even if the venom did not kill him, it made no sense. According to everything she had been taught about the universe, the Valkyrie survived by calculation and careful planning. They weighed every action against its potential consequences, and they never sacrificed themselves for anyone who was not family or bound to them by ancient oath. Yet this human had done exactly that for a stranger who had treated him with nothing but contempt since the moment they met. She spent the next 2 days recovering her strength while the political storm raged around her, and she listened to the reports from her guards about the negotiations between Earth and the Valkyrie High Council. Earth was threatening to withdraw from all treaty discussions if Marcus was executed, and the council was insisting that sacred law could not be bent for political convenience, and neither side was willing to back down. On the third day, Saritha rose from her bed and demanded to be taken to the human cell. Her guards protested, but she silenced them with a look that reminded them exactly who she was. The daughter of the matriarch did not repeat her requests. She found Marcus sitting cross-legged in the center of his energy prison, his eyes closed as if he were meditating, and she noticed that his lips were still swollen and discolored from the venom he had drawn from her body. He opened his eyes when she approached, and she saw no fear in them, only a calm acceptance that she found deeply unsettling. Ambassador, he said, and he rose to his feet with a fluid motion that surprised her given his injuries. I am glad to see you recovered. You should not be glad of anything, she replied. You are going to die because of what you did. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. But you are alive, so I consider that a fair trade. There it was again. That impossible human logic that was not logic at all, but something else entirely. Something that defied everything Saritha understood about how sentient beings were supposed to behave. Why did you do it? She asked, and she was surprised by how much she needed to know the answer. You knew the consequences. You knew our laws. Why would you sacrifice yourself for someone who has shown you nothing but disrespect? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and she saw him considering her question as if it were genuinely difficult to answer. Because you were dying, he finally said. And I could not let that happen when I had the power to stop it. That is not a reason, Saritha insisted. That is merely a statement of circumstances. I am asking why those circumstances compelled you to act as you did. Marcus smiled then, a small sad expression that looked strange on his battered face. I do not think I can explain it in a way that would make sense to you, Ambassador. Because the answer is simply that watching someone die when you could save them feels wrong. It feels like a failure of everything you are supposed to be as a person, even if saving them means your own death. Even then, Marcus confirmed, especially then. Perhaps because what kind of person lets someone else die just to preserve their own life? Saritha had no answer to that question because in Velkari culture, the answer was obvious. The kind of person who let someone else die was the kind of person who survived. And survival was the highest virtue. But standing here looking at this human who had traded his life for hers without hesitation, she found herself questioning whether survival was truly enough. The Council will demand your execution, she said. And Earth will demand your release. And this will likely end in war between our peoples. I did not do it to start a war, Marcus said quietly. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Whatever comes next is not something I can control. You are remarkably calm for someone facing death. Fear would not change anything, he replied. And I have always believed that you should meet the end of your life the same way you lived it, with as much dignity as you can manage. Saritha turned away because she could not look at him anymore. Not while these strange new thoughts were churning in her mind like a storm. She could not quiet. She had spent her entire life believing that humans were lesser beings, slaves to their emotions and incapable of the cold rationality that made the Velkari great. But this human had shown more courage and conviction in a single moment than most. Velkari showed in their entire lives he had done something impossible. And now she had to decide what she was going to do about it. I will speak to the Council, she said without turning around. I cannot promise anything, but I will speak to them. Thank you, Ambassador, Marcus said. Though I would ask that you not risk your position for my sake. You have already been through enough because of me. She almost laughed at that because it was such a perfectly human thing to say. Worrying about her well-being when he was the one facing execution. You saved my life, she said. And in doing so, you have complicated everything. I thought I understood about your species. The least I can do is try to save yours in return. She walked away before he could respond because she needed time to think, time to plan. Time to figure out how to save a human who should have been her enemy, but somehow was not. The tribunal was coming, and she intended to be ready for it. The tribunal chamber was carved from black stone that seemed to swallow light, and the 12 members of the High Council sat in a curved row that reminded Marcus of judges waiting to pass sentence, which, of course, was exactly what they were. He stood in the center of the room with energy shackles around his wrists, flanked by Velkari guards who looked like they would happily kill him themselves if given the opportunity. The gallery behind him was filled with observers from both species. Humans from Earth's diplomatic corps on one side and Velkari nobles on the other. And the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on High Counselor Velthros, sat at the center of the council's row, his scales a deep crimson that marked him as ancient and powerful. And when he spoke, his voice filled the chamber like the rumble of distant thunder. Commander Marcus Cole of Earth, you stand accused of violating the sacred law of touch by placing your mouth upon the flesh of Ambassador Saritha, daughter of the High Matriarch. How do you answer these charges? Marcus had been coached by Earth's legal team on what to say, but looking at those amber eyes filled with cold judgment, he decided to speak his own truth instead. I do not deny what I did, he said. I placed my mouth on the ambassador's wound and drew the venom from her body. If that is a crime in your eyes, then I am guilty. Akanus, Murmur rippled through the Valkyrie side of the gallery, and Marcus heard words like arrogant and defiant among the hissing whispers. The punishment for this crime is death. Valthros continued, and there are no exceptions written into our law. Do you have anything to say before sentence is passed? Earth's ambassador, a woman named Chun, stepped forward from the human section of the gallery. High Counselor, the government of Earth formally protests these proceedings. Commander Cole acted to save a life, and punishing him for that action is a violation of basic morality, recognized by every civilized species in the galaxy. Your morality is not our morality, one of the other counselors snapped. And your species has no standing to lecture us on civilization when you have existed among the stars for barely a century. We have standing as a treaty partner. Ambassador Chun fired back. And if you execute Commander Cole, that partnership ends today. Earth will withdraw from all negotiations, and you can find someone else to help you secure the Sirath IV ruins. The chamber erupted in angry voices from both sides. And for a moment, Marcus thought the war he had hoped to prevent might begin right here in this room. Then a clear voice cut through the chaos, and everyone fell silent. I invoke Valthorus, Siritha said. She stood at the entrance to the chamber, dressed in formal robes of silver and white, and she walked toward the council with the measured grace of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The counselors looked at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage, and Valthros leaned forward in his seat. Ambassador Siritha, you cannot be serious. Valthorus has not been invoked in over 1,000 years. The law does not expire with disuse. Siritha replied, Valthorus remains written in our oldest codes, and I invoke it now in defense of the human Marcus Cole. Marcus had no idea what Valthorus was, but from the reaction of the Valkyrie in the gallery, it was something significant. Explain for those who may not be familiar with the ancient rites, Valthros commanded. Though his tone suggested he was the one who needed reminding, Siritha turned to face the gallery, and her voice rang out clear and strong. Valthorus, the blood claim, dates from the founding of our civilization. It states that when one person saves the life of a noble through the shedding of their own blood, the two become bound together in the eyes of sacred law. She looked at Marcus then, and he saw something fierce in her amber eyes. When Commander Cole drew the venom from my body, that venom burned his mouth and entered his bloodstream. He bled for me. And in doing so, he triggered the oldest protection our law provides. Valthorus was meant for Valkyrie saving Valkyrie. Another counselor protested, not for aliens saving our nobility. Show me where the law specifies species, Siritha challenged. Quote me the passage that says only Valkyrie blood can invoke the right. I have studied the text myself, and no such limitation exists. The council members looked at each other, and Marcus could see them struggling to find a counter-argument, even if we accept your interpretation. Valthros said slowly, Valthorus would bind you to this human for life. Your fates would be intertwined, your decisions shared, your futures linked until death separates you. Is that truly what you want? Siritha did not hesitate. He gave his blood to save my life. I give my future to save his. That is the nature of Valthorus, and I accept it willingly. The chamber was completely silent, and Marcus found himself staring at the ambassador with something close to awe. She was sacrificing her independence, her political future, possibly even her standing with her own family, all to save a human she had known for less than 2 weeks. This is unprecedented, Valthros said. And for the first time, Marcus heard uncertainty in the old counselor's voice. Many unprecedented things have happened in the last few days, Siritha replied. And I believe it is time for us to recognize that the universe is larger than our traditions. This human saved my life when any rational being would have let me die, and our law demands that I protect him in return. She turned to face Marcus directly, and she spoke words that would change both their lives forever. by the ancient right of Valthuris. I claim this human as my bloodbound. His life is now linked to mine, and any harm done to him is harm done to me. The council cannot execute him without executing part of their ambassador." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and then Velthros let out a long breath. "The council will deliberate," he announced. "But if the law is as you say, ambassador, then we may have no choice but to accept your claim." Marcus was escorted back to his cell while the council argued behind closed doors, and he spent hours wondering if Saritha's desperate gamble would work when the guards finally came to release him. He knew that she had won. He was free, bound to an alien noble by an ancient law he did not understand, and nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following the tribunal were unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced, and he found himself navigating a world that had been turned completely upside down. The Valthuris bond was not simply a legal technicality. It carried real weight in Velkari society, and suddenly Marcus went from being a condemned criminal to something far more complicated: the bloodbound partner of one of the most powerful nobles in the Empire. He was given quarters aboard Saritha's diplomatic vessel, and he spent his days learning about Velkari customs and protocols while trying to understand what his new position actually meant. "You look confused," Saritha observed one morning as they shared a meal in her private dining chamber, "which is understandable given the circumstances." "I'm trying to figure out the rules," Marcus admitted. "And every time I think I understand something, I discover 3 more things I did not know." Saritha made a sound that Marcus had learned to recognize as amusement. "Welcome to Velkari politics. Even those of us born into it spend our entire lives trying to understand the rules." It was strange how much had changed between them. The contempt that had defined their early interactions was gone, replaced by something that Marcus could only describe as cautious respect. She no longer looked at him like he was an animal that had wandered into her path, and he no longer felt the need to prove his worth through perfect professional distance. They were bound together now, and that bond required them to actually know each other. The treaty negotiations resumed 3 weeks after the tribunal, and this time everything was different. The Velkari delegates who had previously ignored Marcus now watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, trying to understand what made him so special that an ambassador would invoke an ancient right to save him. The human delegates watched him too, though their expressions tended more toward admiration and relief. "You have become something of a celebrity," Ambassador Chun told him during a break in the negotiations. "The human who saved an alien noble and survived the consequences. There are already stories spreading across Earth about what you did. I did not do it to become famous." Marcus said, "I know," Chum replied with a smile. "And that is probably why the stories are spreading so fast. People love heroes who do not want to be heroes." The negotiations themselves went more smoothly than anyone had expected, and Marcus suspected that Saritha had something to do with that. She advocated for compromises that would have been unthinkable before, and she spoke about humans with a respect that surprised even her own delegation. "The prevailing wisdom among my people has been that humans are inferior," she told the council during one session. "But I have come to believe that we have been measuring with the wrong standards." She looked at Marcus across the chamber, and he felt the weight of her amber gaze. "Humans do not calculate their actions the way we do. They do not weigh every choice against potential consequences and choose the path that maximizes their advantage, and we have always seen this as a weakness." She paused, and the chamber was utterly silent. "But I have learned that there is strength in their way of thinking as well. A human will throw themselves into danger without hesitation if someone needs help, and they will sacrifice their own well-being for strangers who have done nothing to earn such loyalty. That is not strength." One of the counselors objected. "That is foolishness, is it?" Saritha challenged. Commander Cole saved my life knowing that it would likely cost him his own. He did not calculate. He did not negotiate. He simply acted because he saw someone in need and could not stand by and do nothing. She let those words settle over the chamber before continuing. We have always believed that our cold rationality makes us superior. But I wonder now if we have lost something important along the way, the capacity for sacrifice, for compassion, for acting without guarantee of reward. The council murmured among themselves, and Marcus could see that her words were having an effect even on those who disagreed. I am not suggesting we abandon our traditions, Saritha concluded, but I am suggesting that we open our minds to the possibility that humans have something to teach us, something we have forgotten how to be. She turned to face the full council, and her voice rang out with conviction. They are not lesser beings. They are simply different, and in that difference, there is a kind of bravery we would do well to understand. Marcus sat in the gallery and watched her speak, and he felt something shift in his chest that he could not quite name. She had changed because of him, and he realized that he had changed because of her as well. He had entered this mission, believing that the Velkari were cold and arrogant, incapable of growth or connection. But Saritha had proven him wrong in ways he was still trying to understand when the session ended. She found him in the corridor outside the chamber. "What did you think?" she asked, and Marcus heard something vulnerable beneath her usual composure. "I think you just changed the course of history," he said honestly. I think you were incredibly brave to say what you said." "Brave without calculation," Saritha replied, and there was a hint of humor in her voice. "Perhaps you're rubbing off on me." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "That does not sound like a bad thing." They walked together through the corridors of the station, and Marcus reflected on how far they had come from those first hostile days on Sarathive. They were not friends exactly, because the concept of friendship meant different things to their respective species. But they were something, allies perhaps, or partners, or simply two people bound together by circumstance who had discovered that they actually liked each other. Valther's bond would shape the rest of their lives in ways neither of them could predict. But Marcus found that he was no longer afraid of that future. He had saved her life on instinct, without thinking about what it might cost him. And somehow that single act had created something new between their peoples, a bridge that would not have existed otherwise. As they reached the observation deck and looked out at the stars, Saritha spoke quietly. "I never thanked you properly for what you did. You saved my life in return," Marcus reminded her. "I think we are even." She turned to look at him, and her amber eyes held warmth that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "We are not even," she said, "because what you did was braver. You had no ancient law to invoke, no cultural framework to justify your actions. You simply saw someone dying and decided that was unacceptable." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood together in silence and watched the stars. Two people from two different worlds who had somehow found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and Marcus Cole had never been more grateful to be part of it.